So I'm working on a quarter of a size of that print paper that we were using before. And what do we got here? I believe it is 12, so it's 15 by 11. I really like this drawing surface, so that's what I want to do. So what we're after here is eventually we're going to be drawing these cubes in perspective, but it starts off with squares. We're going to create a grid of squares. I started in the middle. I wanted that to be this square here to be in the middle of the page. And then directly above that square, I'm drawing another square. And below it, another square. Then directly across, I'm drawing another row here, a row of squares, and they are all in alignment, as you can see. So we're going to come up, first of all, on our paper here below, we're going to draw a grid of squares, and they will be a certain width, and they will have a certain distance apart, and we're going to start off in the center of the page. So you know how to do this because you did this on your very first assignment. So finding the center of the page, of course, is just drawing yourself toward yourself, just very, very, very lightly. And you're going to get it pretty close. We don't have to worry about exact. And there, I found it. I didn't even have to go any further, but I pretty much found the center of the page. And once I have that, I keep an eye on this left edge, and I bring my pencil up, and I draw toward myself through that point as straight as I possibly can. And if it does help to erase, and it will, these diagonal lines, because they do not help you to create a square, because they are only representing, they're like this. They're not actually square. So at this point, what you want to do is create a square of a certain size. So I am using my thumb. I'm using this measure as my middle, and there. And let's just see if we want to make sure that they're about the same size. And do use your eye. Your eye is going to be a bit more accurate. So once you've got one side representing one side of those squares, then you just bring up and down the other one. So this will give me a nice column for that first row of squares. And it's at this point, if that's the middle of my page, I'm going to use a 45-degree line to help me establish that initial square. And this very initial square is very key to have it be correct. So if you need to use a measure of some kind to see how close you are, by all means do that, because you will want to get it correct. So looks like we're okay on that, because once you've established this, you're off to the races, because this depth here will now establish the depth or the height of the squares all the way across on that row. So just drawing really carefully and controlled. This is, again, fantastic practice and a really great reminder of how to do this. So nice and controlled. So now I have at least the row of the middle squares, and I have the column of the center squares as well. And then about the same distance apart, and you can, by this time, you can start to look and eyeball just a little bit more accurately. And then this will be now, this is the space between those squares. I'm going to draw as straight as I can and as parallel as I can. I'm concentrating quite a bit. And then the next square over. And like I say, if you have to use some cheater methods, I'd have no problems with that, because you are developing your eye, even in that way you are. So just turn toward yourself, nice and careful. And look at how light that line is. That guideline is still very light, because we're eventually going to use tone to describe the edges of these eventual cubes. So now I have my first row, or my last row, depending on which is the bottom or the top of your paper. So one column, two column, and now my third column. Again, I'm looking to create the same distance apart. I'm concerned about layout, always concerned about layout. And draw that vertical line and this vertical line. I'm constantly assessing whether I have a square or not, and I'll make those adjustments. But what is key is that these squares align, and the columns and the squares will align after that. So if you can see what I've got here, I now no longer have to eyeball where the next square is, because I'm going to use my diagonal line. So this diagonal line that created this square is now going to be used to create the remainder of those columns and those rows. So I'll just draw this diagonal toward myself through that corner straight as possible when it hits that line. And then this line, you automatically have for yourself a means to establish that bottom row of squares. And here's the other one. And the diagonal may be a little bit off, and if that's the case, just make some corrections. So that looks pretty good. So great. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. I need my top row. So easy from that initial square, and that's why that initial square has to be as good as it possibly can get. There's the one mark as a diagonal and my other mark, and that will then establish my next row of squares. So keeping in mind that you're drawing toward yourself, and I'm going to make a little correction on that square because I can tell that this side is too short, this is longer, so I just made that correction here. The key is, though, is that whatever height you establish, you carry it all the way across. So there is a beautiful grid, and you can darken up these faces of these squares just so that they stand out a bit and it's much easier to read. So I'll go ahead and do that.